Throw my hands up in the air. I know I can count on you. Sometimes I feel like saying, Lord, I just don't care. But you've got the love.
Welcome to the Shed with a Chandelier.
Sometimes it seems the going is just too rough.
Hello, Laura.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi, Laura. How are you?
I'm good.
Laura, I'm so happy to speak to you today because I'd just like to introduce you because you are a New York Times bestseller and you're also an international bestseller of your book, This Is Not the Story You Think It Is. And you had done a Q&A for me before, and in it I mentioned that I feel like when I've read your book and when I've seen things about you that you're the sort of person that you can instantly feel like you could sit down and have a cup of tea or a glass of wine with and chat for hours. And so I'm really, really pleased to get to speak to you today. I know. So, but it's fantastic, isn't it, that we can do this, that you're in your world in Montana and I'm on my island in the Med.
I
and
know.
still be able to discuss things about creativity. So, Laura, your book, I don't want to dwell on the topic of the book that is perceived by many because a lot of people take it as being about marriage and surviving marriage and stuff like that. And you refer to it more about a book of about empowerment, don't you?
Yes,
rather
the entry point is a marital crisis. And I basically wrote my way through a really rough time in my marriage. But the book is not a strategy about, how to stay married. In fact, none of us knows the future of our lives, and the book isn't all tied up in a pink bow at the end either. It's really about a person's process and commitment to not suffer and to gain some level of emotional freedom when society tells you you're really an emotional victim. I don't believe in emotional victims. I think that our emotions are our choice. And, if I'm going to freak out, I'd like to powerfully choose that freak out instead of feel like it's choosing me. So the whole book is just a process of kind of dealing with rejection in a way that's very different than how we're kind of trained to behave during crisis. And the only way I learned it was from being a writer and dealing with rejection year after year after year.
So you had an agent before this book, and you've written many books before that, haven't you, Laura? And before this became like this massive success, because the book's been published and it's in many, many languages, isn't it? And you've completed a tour in the US and in the UK and stuff, and I think you've had a very busy year last year, didn't you, doing all of that? So, I mean, It's out there all over the place, but prior to that you were writing novels, weren't you?
Right. This book is a memoir, and all of the books that I had written prior to that were novels, and none of them is published yet. They're not all good ones.
But you know what I was saying to my husband about how I'd love to read some of your books before. I know you're writing, at the moment you're writing a new one, aren't you, a new novel, but I'm sure they're not all rubbish. So it would be really good. Will that ever happen, do you think? Or do you think you're moving on now?
Well, that is such a good question and something that I don't have the answer to yet. I mean, but I do. People say, now you can get all your other books published. Well, I don't know how good all those other books are. Many of them are exercises in learning. And in a way, maybe I needed to write my absolute truth in order to free up the fiction. But fiction is my real love, and I'm writing a novel right now, and I do notice that it's different than my prior work. It's
than the ones before.
Yeah, I think
in what
there's
way?
An authority that once you have readers, there is this feeling like the trajectory can actually be met. And so I'm considering the reader a lot more in how I'm constructing this story. I do have two novels that I love that I wrote within the last 10 or so years. And I'd love to see them.
You know why I say that? I mean, you've mentioned, we've done a Q&A, so I don't want to dwell on this because it will be seen in that. But you have, you did have an agent, and you pointed out from that it was really because you didn't have a platform as well, that people didn't know, which people don't understand that always, do they? You've been sitting there for years and years writing all this stuff in Montana or wherever, and yet now it is becoming more important to try, or maybe it always did, to make sure people know you exist, doesn't it? Especially when you're there and I'm here and we're in our houses with families and stuff. So, that seemed to be quite important in the end, didn't it?
Yes, the P word, platform, it's very different than it used to be, I'm told. People who got their careers before the Internet really kind of were promised long careers instead of necessarily wide careers, so they could get a 3-book deal, or they could, or they stuck with the same editor year after year after year who championed their work. And for whatever reason, I think it is probably the Internet. So many people are publishing their books on the Internet and skipping over the whole publishing industry, and so they are very, very selective about what they'll publish. And my agent actually said to me one day, I'm not sending your stuff out anymore without you having a platform, because you're, in her words, she said, you're too good of a writer to keep falling between the cracks. And I just put my head on my desk and wept, because I know how do you get a platform.
No, but isn't that an amazing, that you cried over that, right? But it was really amazing. What did you do?
Well, and then I wrote an essay, which was the short version of the book that I had just written during that time in my life, and I had just submitted it to her. And she had gone out with 2 of my novels, which almost went all the way, and then they were both rejected in the end because nobody, knew who Laura Munson from Montana was. So she suggested that I write the short version of the memoir, and send it to a column in the New York Times that a lot of people in the publishing industry read, and a lot of people in general read, which is called the Modern Love column. And I had sent like 4 or 5 essays to the Modern Love column in the last several years, which all met with rejection. And so my hopes were very high.
You can tell me if I'm wrong, but I get the impression with you that you would have been quite purist as well. In that you've written your books and that's what's important, eh? And then you've got to go and do this. Did it feel a bit like this? That you've
I appreciate that comment very much, because that's what I am. I'm a book writer. I'm not really a blogger or an article writer or an essay writer, although I do love the personal essay form. But I really love sitting in my little office here writing books. And so she wasn't asking me to, prostitute myself or anything.
You went to change your whole personality, just put the stuff out there.
It didn't feel like any kind of a cop-out, really. So I wrote the short version that afternoon in about an hour, and I sent it off to the New York Times.
Hold on a minute. Okay, you wrote in an hour, so that kind of proves something, doesn't it?
Well, I don't know.
Most people might not find that quite so easy to write in an hour.
True. But if you've written 14 novels, writing a 1,200-page word essay, well, for me it's easier to do.
It was a walk in the park.
Yeah, and I really had my finger on the pulse of that story because I'd written the long form.
You knew it.
So I'd lived it. So then I went and picked up my kids from school, and I came back, and there was a note in my inbox from the editor of the Modern Love column from the New York Times that said, "This one we're going to take."
Oh, okay.
And then
what did you do then? You didn't cry then, did you?
I didn't believe it. Well, actually, you know what it felt like to me? It felt like it's about time is what it felt like.
Enough already. I've done this.
Yeah. And so the day it was published that morning, there were only I had started a blog which I considered as sort of like a literary journal because I wanted to control at least having some readers or posting my work and so but nobody was reading it except for my my mother and my sister. And so that morning there were 3 hits on my blog, and by the end of the day there were 3,000. And that's the power of the New York Times. And that essay is kind of famous in the United States now, and I still hear I hear
because
from
it ended up other places, didn't it, as well?
It did. It ended up in the Oprah magazine in South Africa, and it was reproduced in Australia and in the United Kingdom, and in newspapers and magazines, and you just never know what's going to hit. You just never know. And so then,
did you feel when that happened? Sorry, but just to go. So you're there with your kids and your husband and your house and your horses and your mountains. How did it feel real? I mean, was it kind of surreal? How did it actually feel when that happened?
Well, I think that if I had been 21 or 2 or 31 or 2, I was 42, I think, at the time, it would have been different. But I really know who I am on the page now, and I trust it, and I haven't, I trust myself as a writer, and I know myself as a writer. So it felt like, it did feel surreal, but this whole experience has taught me that success is a myth. And that it's all about doing the work. And, in a way, thank God I didn't have all this happen to me when I was younger, because I would have been like a deer in the headlights, as we say around here in Montana. But I've been
talking, Laura, you won't necessarily know, but to different people or writers and artists, and I'm an artist myself, and it comes up over and over because people have been doing it and they've had perceived success. Well, it is success, but they still have to do it. You have to do it. So, and you were doing it. So it is. I can understand what you're saying there. That in that situation, you knew what you were doing, didn't you? And it was about time.
Right. Well, the work is the thing, and that's what I just say over and over again. And so. But what happened was that 2 days later, I got a publishing deal with one of the hottest editors in New York City, and actually there were 2 different editors who wanted it from 2 different publishing houses, and I just the whole experience for me has been very full of grace and generosity, and I think that that's the power of telling your story in an honest and compassionate and responsible and real way. People kind of meet you there. And so in many ways, I'm glad that my first book is a memoir, because it's just about as vulnerable as a person can be, exposing their thoughts and their life on the page. And so all of the touring and all
So, but I was just going to say that the way you write, you say it as it is, don't you? It seems to me that you're very direct, aren't you? And you say it how you feel, and I suppose that's what people relate to. I mean, I enjoy the way you write and the way you comment on things and everything. So I can appreciate what you're saying there. I think that's very, very true.
It's an honor to be able to finally have readers. That's the thing that's different, is that I now get to have conversations with wonderful people like you and make connections with people who spend their lives much like I do. That part, just knowing you're not alone. I hear from a lot of artists. I also hear from a lot of people in marital crisis, but I love when I hear from artists, because it's like, welcome, sister. We're all in this together, this life of creating something from nothing.
Well, that's why I kind of wanted to do this, because I know how many people are sitting, working away, doing all over the world, doing it every day with life going on round about it, not in the dreamland that people kind of sometimes perceive that there's not all the stuff that goes on around about, that you're in this lovely studio or whatever, and there's no family, no this, no that. But in reality, people are living their lives and doing it, aren't they, Laura? I would say, imagine you would agree.
Yeah, I have met so many writers in the last 2 years. It's been 2 years, because the hardback came out in 2010, and then the paperback came out in this country. Yeah. And so I've met all these writers who are pretty famous, including Pulitzer Prize winners. And we're all just doing the same thing. We're all sitting in our pajamas in the dark with tea or coffee, hopefully not wine, at this hour.
And
just asking yourself the very powerful question, which is, what can I create? And that's actually when people say, how are you able to go about your business and not take your husband's words personally and not, freak out? Really, the answer to that is asking the question, what can I create, over and over and over again, even if it's something like 3 deep breaths or a pot of tea or a walk in the snow with the dogs. It's really just the minutia. And I think that's how you get your way through writing a novel, too. It's not, you don't take it all on. It's just like life. It's just in little measurements. And then suddenly you come out the other side with a 400-page book, and that seems very daunting to people. But I think if you really take life breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat, it's manageable and not so terrifying, even when really scary stuff is happening to you.
Well, can I, on that point, yesterday I was talking to a lovely friend who, at the moment, doesn't see herself living, she's writing or doing anything particularly creative, although I can see her doing lots of stuff creative, but however, that's how she perceives it at the moment. And we were discussing this, and she said that she thinks that most people are creative when they're in turmoil or unstable. My first impression to that is, oh my God, that would be so tiring if that was the case all the time, that you could only create in the midst of turmoil or you were unstable. And then I was looking at something that you'd said, and you'd said that you're going to be doing these writers' workshops, and that you said you were on a crusade to end the tortured artist paradigm and help shift it into the empowered artist paradigm. So I think you've got an opinion on it then, Laura, on this whole thing.